This is Marsha Stonehill with Melt the Ice. Today on Operation F.L.O.W, I'm bringing back to us Mr. Sean Lipson. He is a physical therapist assistant, a licensed massage therapist, and a myofascial release therapist. And some of you may have already heard him speak in podcast number 49. Sean, thank you for coming back today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I really appreciate having you here. I asked Sean to come back because I personally have been seeking some of the services of the myofascial release. And my reasoning for seeking that treatment was because I had this big knot arise under my left scapula, of all places. Very bizarre. There was no apparent point of injury, no incident that I remember hurting it or doing anything, and decided to pursue this avenue, to see how it worked. And I must say that I've been completely fascinated by the science and the connectivity inside of our body, and that, to have personally experienced this, we don't want anybody to be injured, but then, because I did have this injury, it was just completely fascinating to experience how when you applied the myofascial release techniques to treating this problem, where all these connections were. I became the most fascinated when you decided there needed to be work in my diaphragm area.
Yeah. We always say, find the symptom, look elsewhere for the cause.
Right.
This work, so.
Well, and the last thing a person would think is, how's your diaphragm connected to your scapula? But then even more interesting to me was that when you started the work in that area, it completely resembled an indigestion feeling, which was a feeling that I would often experience even as a young child. I guess in stressful situations, you could say. And I just learned how to live with it and learned how to say, gosh, there's just a lot of stress in this room. Stomach, you don't have to do this.
Yeah, I guess I have acid reflux, or
Right.
guess I have all these dietary sensitivities, or what have you. Yeah,
right.
Definitely. The diaphragm is connected to like everything. There's so many issues, including your shoulder, that oddly enough, the diaphragm can have an impact on. It's a very, very sensitive area. A lot of people just think of the diaphragm as like, breathing.
I don't even know if we think of our diaphragm.
Yeah, that's really the truth of it too. Is most people don't think of their diaphragm. Most people have their breathing in some weird dysfunction a lot of times that they don't even realize it. They're, again, like I always say, like when we have these conversations, is so many people are walking around just braced and tight, and don't even realize it. I always make the joke, people are wearing their shoulders as earrings, but they're also walking around like they're about to get punched in the stomach by Mike Tyson. Like they don't even realize how much they're tensing that entire area. And I mean, not only does it affect our breathing, of course, that's what we think of as its main job, but swallowing, vocalization, coughing, all those things are controlled by the diaphragm. I mean, try to inhale or exhale and swallow at the same time. It's impossible. So the diaphragm has to talk to a lot of other areas of our body via neurological connections, fascial connections, that whole neurofascial network. There's a lot of nerve bundles that just run right through the diaphragm. I mean, they always teach us in school, C3, 4, and 5 in the cervical spine, C3, 4, and 5 keep the diaphragm alive. The phrenic nerve is what comes out of there and what helps us breathe. And that's one of the mantras they used to always tell us in school all the time. But there's even connections into the vagus nerve, trigeminal nerve, those nerves that act on the mouth, the vagus nerve, obviously. Some people are familiar with the vagus nerve, it's talked about a little bit more recently, I feel like, because of its autonomic function in our nervous system. So that's all of our involuntary responses. Your heart beating is an autonomic function. You don't have to think about it to beat, it just does. So a lot of those types of bodily functions are controlled by the autonomic nervous system, and our diaphragm talks to that part of our nervous system.
Right. Which is why we don't think about it.
Exactly. But I think, you take it for granted.
Right. And then, even when we think about or reflect on breathing techniques, we're mostly thinking about how we fill our lungs with air, not how our diaphragm is moving or how we may be posturing ourselves that is cramping our diaphragm and inhibiting that autonomic response right?
Yeah. I mean, you think about where the diaphragm is located, like right at the base of the rib cage there, and when that's tightening and bracing, again, like everything else with the fascial system, we're creating a drawstring effect, right? So if you took like a drawstring and put it right in the center of your stomach there, right at the xiphoid where the rib cage meets, and pulled it, you can imagine how you would start to slouch forward, and that starts to happen inside of our bodies. And when that restriction starts to occur, not only is it disrupting the rhythm of our diaphragm and how it rises and falls as we breathe, but it's also starting to put that crushing pressure on all of those nerves that run through there and the nerves that those nerves connect to. So again, like, with the swallowing and things like that, those are, again, there are some vagal signals that go to the phrenic nerve, to let it know when, you're eating food, so you don't accidentally inhale it. Our esophagus and our larynx, which is our windpipe, the larynx has to close when the esophagus opens and vice versa. That way you don't choke. So those little things like that are definitely things with the diaphragm that we take for granted, because it's doing a lot more than just helping us breathe day to day.
So in this regard, Sean, in your experience through the myofascial release, what are other problems or symptoms a person could be experiencing that could then be connected? You've said swallowing, things like that, but, and then shoulder pain or other things. Are there other things that you can point toward that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a strong connection between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor as well. So obviously pelvic floor function is important for stabilization, urinary continence. There's all types of reproductive issues that can develop because of pelvic floor restriction and dysfunction. And the pelvic floor is actually somewhat involved in our breath too. So the pelvic floor and the diaphragm work together almost like a piston system, right? So when we inhale and exhale, there's also electrical activity that recently has been observed in certain studies that is occurring at the pelvic floor level in synchronicity with the diaphragm. So you can also develop issues, issues in the pelvic floor can affect the diaphragm. Issues in the diaphragm can affect the pelvic floor. And that's another really big vital area. There's also they also are able to see electrical activity at the floor of the mouth with breathing too. And when we think of biotensegrity, and that's just tensegrity, again, I think I talked about this in the last podcast too. Just the concept of it's exactly what the word sounds like: tension integrity. So it's our bodies function this way, just how you would see a cable bridge have its stability from equal tension on those cables, or how a tent stays pitched from guy wires. It's not the poles keeping it up, it's those guy wires, that tension on those that keeps its shape and integrity of the structure. And our bodies are the exact same way. So when the diaphragm moves, everything moves. Again, it's that drawstring effect. So when the diaphragm is rising and falling, we're also able to actually see now rising and falling in the floor of the mouth and even in the pelvic floor through different types of electrical imaging. They're starting to see this connection.
That was a great analogy that you used.
Yeah, it helps kind of get the idea.
It helps give a picture. Yeah. Absolutely.
We're so trained to think our bones are what keep us upright in space and combat gravity, but it's really, again, the fascial system. It's that tensegrity. If it wasn't for tensegrity and how everything in our body basically functions in a spiral motion. You wouldn't be able to, jump up in the air or run, do a lot of things where there's compressive and decompressive forces happening
Right.
back to back. That's all because of tensegrity that's happening. So when those forces get out of tension, are out of balance in our body, we develop a lot of dysfunction.
Sure.
Diaphragm's no exception.
Absolutely. So then in this regard, what would be preventive measures that people can use to ensure that they're not allowing too much tension to accumulate in the diaphragm? I was going to say diaphragmatic area, but in their diaphragm or in that region of their body. To me, it seems like it's really about raising a new level of consciousness,
right,
and awareness. It's something that we don't normally have to think about, but in order to we do have to intentionally think about it in order to prevent that tension from happening. Am I right on that?
Yeah, if you remember, like when we were treating that area, and this is something I do with all patients and clients when I'm treating that area, is I have them center their awareness there. Close their eyes, start to feel their breath. I tell them to always let their shoulders relax, because a lot of times too, again, with this tensing, our neck pain can be stemming from this issue, because now we're using accessory breathing muscles up in our neck, in our collar, around our collarbones and shoulders, to help elevate the rib cage because of restriction in the diaphragm. So, and when we're bracing like that, we are creating restriction. So, and we're not even aware of it. So one thing I have patients do, and this is easy to do on your own at home, is just, you can take a hand and place it on your diaphragm, close your eyes, and start to center your awareness there. Let your shoulders relax. Fill your lungs as full as you can get them. Allow that rib cage to expand nice and slow. Exhale nice and slow. Start to feel that rhythm and put your awareness there. The more you practice just simple awareness of the diaphragm, the more just day to day you can become aware of the tension you might be holding there. And that is a big help just from the start, because I mean, a good amount of dysfunction starts from that stress response. We tighten down, and everyone tends to be so stressed all the time.
Right. And we might be more aware of the tension we carry maybe in our neck and shoulders more so than we are in our abdominal region.
Right. It's teaching you to soften when you can put your awareness there and really allow yourself to feel into that area. There's something called diaphragmatic breathing, which, you can look that up on Google, anywhere. It's a very basic breathing exercise that helps kind of reestablish that normal rhythm of our breath, and relax the nervous system as well.
So I think in wrapping up here in part one, I think part of what we're trying to say is we're not certainly not discouraging anyone from getting proper medical care.
Right.
This is a component of medical care and treatment for sure, but if people have unexplained abdominal pain or indigestion issues, in particular, is what I wanted to point out, especially in dealing with highly sensitive people.
Yeah.
That certainly take this into consideration. Always get the medical attention you need, but if the medical tests are coming back with everything negative and other things have not given the outcomes you're looking for or want or need, that this may be an avenue to explore. And we can talk further about that in part two. And what else would you like to say and wrap up here for part one?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in our body. And a lot of times, up until recently, a lot of these types of neurofascial connections, the fascial system, all these manual therapies that are available out there, they kind of ignore this component. They want to treat us a lot of times like, doctors are left scratching their heads. You get told, oh, nothing wrong, we can't find anything, like you had mentioned. Because it's hard to find you can't see these restrictions on normal MRIs, CT scans, X-rays, things like that. So it's kind of underestimated what these fascial restrictions and some of these vital areas of our body where a lot of structures come together and merge and communicate with each other, like what that impact that it can have on our health, and just the wide array of symptom complexes that can be developed from those areas. So it's worth, definitely, you have nothing to lose by getting treated with myofascial release. That's for sure. It's never going to injure. It's very gentle. You don't have to stop other treatments because you're doing that. So it's always worth trying, especially if you are kind of in that point where you're left with no answers and you have one of these issues or things we haven't even mentioned. There's an endless list. It never hurts to get treated. Find a therapist, get treated. You might be surprised with what comes up.
Very good. Yeah.
And I guess that's the main thing I would say about that is get treated.
So Sean, can you share with people your website in case they want to find more information about your services?
Definitely. So I'm located in Fredericksburg, Virginia. My website is www.thehealingconnectionmfr.com. And you can find me there. If you're local in the area, feel free to shoot a message and set up an appointment. Also, I'm in King George as well. I work with Annie Cardwell and Julie Bergeria out there. Annie's practice is called Changing Paces PC. It's a myofascial release based physical therapy clinic. And her website is www.changingpacestherapy.com. So if Fredericksburg is a little too far for you, or you're located a little further east, we are in Dahlgren, King George, and one of us would be more than happy to treat you there as well. So feel free to visit our website there as well and contact us. And also, if you're out of state and you need to find a therapist, you think you would benefit from this work, which pretty much everybody does, you can go on the myofascial release website, which is www.myofascialrelease.com, and there is a therapist directory there, so you can search by state, city, zip code, and find a therapist closest to you.
Thank you for being with us today for part 1, and we look forward to having you back for part 2.
Yep, looking forward to it. Thank you.